Onimusha Warlords is a samurai hack-and-slash game developed by Capcom and first released in 2001 as one of the early titles for the PS2. It grew from the idea to make a ninja version of Resident Evil, and the similarities between it and the early Resident Evil titles are hard to miss. But there's also some differences. Running around with 2 handgun bullets and a butter knife makes sense for a survival horror game. But if you've ever played the classic Resident Evil titles, then at some point you probably wished you could get your hands on a more reliable weapon. Like, I don't know, a sword? Onimusha does you one better. You get magic swords. You're fighting demons instead of zombies, and they don't stand a chance. Capcom made it perfectly clear that when shit hits the fan, samurai make cops and counter-terrorists look like pansies. Onimusha Warlords and most of its sequels were pretty popular back in the day, but unfortunately the series was left basically abandoned for years. Other than a browser game spin-off, the last real title came out in 2006. That is, until 2019 when we got a remaster of Warlords, the first game in the series. It doesn't come even remotely close to the kind of overhaul Capcom did for the Resident Evil remakes, but it's still nice to be able to play an older classic like this optimized for modern hardware. There's widescreen support, better control options, and even though it still resembles a PS2 game, the graphics got enhanced and tidied up a bit. It doesn't include the additions and changes that were added in the Xbox port Genma Onimusha. I never played that version, but I've seen some people say that they prefer it to the original, so I thought I should mention it. The general premise of Onimusha's story is very basic. Good guy tries to save princess from evil monsters. However, there are some details about the setting that make things more interesting. The game takes place during a fictional version of the Sengoku period, an important era of Japanese history during the 15th and 16th centuries when the country was rife with uprisings, rebellions, and civil wars. So a time when knowing how to chop someone's head off was a very useful skill to have. After witnessing the most dramatic drop of sweat I've ever seen, Onimusha's story kicks off in the middle of a historic battle, where you get a glimpse of Nobunaga, the famous Japanese warlord, who doesn't mind taking an arrow to the neck because you're shown just a minute later that somehow he's mysteriously risen from the dead. He's the main antagonist, and you spend most of the game battling his demon pals that work alongside him. So it's a cool little infusion of history and fiction that keeps you grounded enough to make playing as a samurai feel believable for the setting, while still throwing in plenty of supernatural elements. You mainly play as Samanosuke, who you're not given much backstory about, and he doesn't really have a character arc, but Onimusha's a hack-and-slash game and you're shown that he's good at killing stuff, so that's what's important. There's also his assistant Kaide, who you take control of during brief parts of the game. Responding to a fearful letter from Samanosuke's cousin, Princess Yuki, they travel to the location where the entire game takes place, Inabayama Castle. Another thing based on actual history since Nobunaga attacked the real-life version of this place back in the 16th century. After learning that the princess was kidnapped, they split up to explore the demon-infested castle to try and track her down. Right away, Samanosuke gets a visit from Purple Smoke Guy, who gives him a fancy gauntlet that makes him stronger and lets him absorb demon souls, an important aspect of the game's combat system. This all happens during the first few minutes of the game, and it does a good job at quickly setting the stage and getting you excited for what's ahead. Right away, you have a clearly defined goal, a badass protagonist, a setting that seems cool, a relatively unique ability that enhances gameplay, and a bunch of ugly, angry demons to murder. From here, the story mostly takes a backseat to puzzles, exploration, and combat. The occasional new plot developments pop up here and there as you move forward, usually in the form of cutscenes that are mostly simple, to the point, and don't try to shift your focus away from what you're actually here to do: fight demons. So there aren't a lot of big breaks in the action, which I think is perfectly acceptable and fitting for the kind of game that Onimusha is. The only real caveat here is that you can't skip cutscenes, which can get annoying if you're replaying an area because you died or if you're doing a subsequent playthrough. No, I don't want to watch the same 2 cutscenes over and over because I can't figure out this puzzle and Samanosuke keeps drowning, even if he's wearing a panda suit. With the help of a special item, you can chat with corpses and you'll find short journals and notes scattered around the castle too. A few of these were pretty interesting because they're written from the perspective of the demons. Besides showing their disdain for humans by referring to them as animals, and saying creepy stuff like she has beautiful internal organs, they also show a degree of sophistication by talking about rituals they perform, categorizing themselves into different classes, and just displaying the fact that they can actually write in the first place. This makes me wonder how they became literate. Do they have demon schools? Do they have demon book reports? Do they have demon libraries? Anyway, I like how this establishes some of them as intelligent enemies, because it adds extra tension to the plot that you wouldn't get with just mindless monsters. Even though you're usually mowing them down, it still puts the idea in the back of your head that maybe they have a plan or maybe you're walking into a trap, which turns out to be true on a few occasions. Just like the early Resident Evil titles, Onimusha Warlords is old school in the way it uses fixed camera angles and pre-rendered backgrounds. This started going out of style during the PS2 era, but Onimusha Warlords was one of the earliest PS2 titles, and it was originally planned for the PS1, so it makes sense to see it here. I should also point out that the fonts and the simple way the game presents items and puzzles are essentially the same style as Resident Evil. I think most of the environments around the castle look really nice. The backgrounds reportedly received a little bit of polish for the remaster, but otherwise they're apparently the same as in the original, and they've aged pretty well. Some areas just give off straight horror vibes, like a creepy dungeon filled with skeletons. But a lot of places have a very tranquil quality to them, like a relaxing waterfall, a bamboo forest, or neatly decorated interiors. And they seem really chill. The castle is packed with this kind of sharply contrasting imagery. Peaceful environments partially filled with corpses, blood, guts, destruction, and obviously demons. This gives the game an atmosphere that's rich, but also hard to describe. Calm and sinister, pleasant and brutal. What's easier to explain is that I had a lot of fun exploring the castle thanks in part to some really well done artwork. Fixed camera angles won't be everyone's cup of tea, especially with how they can affect the controls, which I'll talk about in a minute. But they are set up in a bunch of different ways that gives you some cool, cinematic shots of the action. The model animations look pretty good too, at least during combat they do. Some of the cutscenes are a different story. I like Kaide's ninja style of fighting a little more than Samanosuke's. Backflipping over enemies before attacking them or slitting their throats looks pretty awesome. But Samanosuke's swift and powerful attacks don't look much worse. And the exaggerated crunching noises you hear whenever you hit an enemy makes each blow you land feel extra satisfying. People raved about the game's 3 big computer-generated cutscenes back in 2001, and it's not hard to see why. There's one at the very beginning, one in the middle, and one at the very end, and they still look relatively impressive 23 years later. But what's going on in the middle one? It's censored in the English version of the game, but if you change the language to Japanese, you can see the whole thing. Some lady transforming into a giant bug by giving birth to herself? What? So that's weird, and so is the controversy surrounding the game's soundtrack. Mamoru Samuragachi received credit for the music in the original PS2 version, who, despite being completely deaf, overcame tremendous odds to become a successful composer, and some people even compared him to Beethoven. Aw, what a heartwarming story. Except it turns out that he lied and he isn't actually deaf, and he had a ghostwriter compose most or possibly even all of his work.
Shame!
So, to distance themselves from this scandal, Capcom totally redid the soundtrack for the remaster. Although, if you still want to play with the original music, there is a mod for that. Depending on where you are in the game, you'll usually hear heroic or spirited music that pumps you up during fights and intense moments, or mysterious or chilling music that amplifies the atmosphere while you explore the castle and its surroundings. If you're nostalgic about the original score, then it might disappoint you, but I really enjoyed the music in the remaster, so I'd recommend at least giving it a chance before modding it away. Most of the time, I thought the English dubbed voice acting was fine, except for this guy, who's supposed to be a major villain, but whenever he opens his mouth, he sounds like the bored kid at a party who can't stop inhaling helium balloons.
Who do you think you are talking to? I haven't seen one as foolish as you since that, Nobunaga.
Inabayama Castle is Onimusha's version of Spencer Mansion or the Raccoon City Police Station. You gain access to new areas around the castle by completing puzzles, upgrading items, or defeating enemies. There's a bit of backtracking, but never to the point where it gets annoying, because the castle isn't very big, so you can usually get to where you need to go pretty quickly. The most significant change you get with the remaster is to the game's controls. A nice upgrade is that now Samanosuke can switch weapons without having to pause and go into your inventory. Also in the original, you only had tank controls, where you had to use the D-pad to move around. That might sound preposterous for a fast-paced action game, but it didn't really hurt the combat thanks to the game's auto-aim feature, and the way that you can lock onto enemies. It was more of a pain to use for traveling around the castle. The tank controls are optional in the remaster, and now you can move around more freely with the analog stick. Unfortunately, this creates some problems of its own because this kind of control scheme doesn't work well with fixed camera angles, since the direction you're facing suddenly shifts when the view changes. You can keep moving in the same direction if you continue to hold down the analog stick, but it feels really awkward to move up while you're holding the stick to the left or some other variation of that, like running down while holding it to the right. It's kind of like if you had to cut the steering wheel in your car to one side in order to drive straight. It's a lot easier to just stop for a second and reorientate yourself whenever the camera shifts. This becomes a little tedious and takes some getting used to, but I still preferred it over using the tank controls. But you won't travel far without running into a bunch of bloodthirsty demons. It's a constant assault that hardly ever lets up, even after you clear out an area, because a lot of the time they'll respawn. The combat is fast-paced, satisfying, and easy to get the hang of. There are some basic, light strategy elements like knowing when to parry, what sword to use, when to evade an attack, or the best time to unleash a magic attack. but a lot of the time it's just good old-fashioned button mashing, which never felt repetitive because of just how engaging it is, and thanks to a decent variety of demons you encounter. I definitely found myself messing up from time to time and taking damage, but all of the recovery options and health upgrades you get makes it pretty easy to stay alive most of the time, even during the handful of boss fights. So what do these souls you absorb with the gauntlet do anyway? Yellow restores your health, white restores your magic, and you collect red to use its save points to enhance your swords and orbs, which are items you find that give Samanosuke his magic power. Upgrading your swords and becoming more powerful can obviously make combat more enjoyable, and it's nice that there's some degree of progression, but it's technically optional. However, you have to upgrade your orbs or else this kind of special door will block you out of certain areas. Onimusha's puzzles really aren't anything special. With only a couple exceptions, they're very simple, and a lot of them only require you to locate a necessary item to get past them. Find ladder, find place to put ladder, use ladder to go to next area. That kind of stuff. The ones that do actually require a little bit of brain power are still very easy. This slider puzzle was really the only one that gave me any kind of trouble. On the bright side, I guess they don't alter the game's pacing much and keep the focus on the combat. But even short, easy puzzles can be satisfying if they take advantage of the game's mechanics in a clever, creative way. Here though, they seem like they were thrown in pretty effortlessly without any real attempt to make them feel fun or rewarding. Ooh, I copied some text directly from these notes I found. Oh yay, picking which lever to pull from one of 3 choices. Ooh, lighting candles. So that part of the game is disappointing. But what is fun and rewarding is the optional zone, the Dark Realm, where you try to fight through 20 different levels of demons without dying. Even though it's 100% a combat zone, it can work kind of like a puzzle. You'll need to come up with a sound strategy that uses magic attacks and items in a smart and efficient way, or else risk depleting these resources too early and having a much harder time during the later stages. It's not really that hard, but it did take me a few tries, and I definitely think it's the hardest part of the game. You pick up some important items along the way, and the final reward helps you get the most powerful sword at the end of the game, which turns the final boss fight into a walk in the park. There are a couple more things I should mention before I go. There is some ranged combat. Samanosuke gets a bow and even a gun. No, I'm kidding, it's not that kind of gun. The matchlock rifle is powerful, but slow and not very fun to use. There are really only a few instances when it's necessary for Samanosuke to use these, and I always preferred melee combat, so they usually just sat in my inventory collecting dust. Kaide's throwing knives, on the other hand, were a lot more useful. Unlike Samanosuke, you don't have to unequip her melee weapons to use them, so you can toss one out at any given moment during a fight, and they're quick and effective in almost any situation. Onimusha Warlords is also a very short game. Even if you take your time to try and see everything it has to offer, you'll probably finish in around 5 or 6 hours. There's even an achievement for beating the game in under 3 hours, so that's definitely possible, and it should give you a good idea of just how short it is. The game tries to justify its length by giving you a rank at the end, just like in Resident Evil, in the hopes that you'll play again to try and achieve a higher score, but I don't really feel like it has a ton of replay value. It does have some. The combat stays fun and addictive, there are collectible items which unlock a special minigame, achievements you can go after, different costumes for Samanosuke and Kaide, and a way to unlock the game's best sword right from the start. But overall, the game is very linear, and there really aren't any ways to make a second playthrough much different from the first. The Onimusha Warlords remaster costs $20. It's a fun game, but its short length and the fact that it's still essentially a PS2 game makes that price seem a little steep. What I would have preferred to see Capcom do is remaster all of the Onimusha games, or at least a couple of them, and then package them together. There's been no official word on the fate of the other Onimusha games, or if there are any plans for a reboot or a new sequel. However, Onimusha did get a Netflix series very recently, just this past November, so maybe that means that the series isn't dead? I don't know, I guess we'll just have to wait and see.